Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Eagle News America. I'm Thomas I. Likeness, coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Tonight, we have updates from several of our correspondents across North America. Arlene Ocampo in Fort Washington, Maryland.
Maryland's health metrics continue to decline. State economic recovery continues.
Carlo Valdez in Union Township, New Jersey, reports on the reopening of restaurants and movie theaters. Jane Kathleen Gregorio in Corpus Christi, Texas.
President Trump visits Texas to review Hurricane Laura damage.
Lori Jarvina in Las Vegas, Nevada, will tell us about the risk of COVID-19 spreading in the city and the fact that that risk remains high. David Reggio in Oxnard, California.
TikTok stars Bryce Hall, Blake Gray charged for hosting large parties in shared Hollywood Hills home.
And for arts and culture, we hear from Eliza Gonzalez Banglikmot in Washington, D.C.
The 2020 Korean Media Arts Series presents virtual exhibit K-Art at Home, Yalu. And Unified Maryland and Centro Rizal conclude this year's Silid Aralan sa Embahada.
Plus a conversation about how we weather life's storms. But first, an overview of how COVID-19 looks now. According to the Coronavirus Resource Center of Johns Hopkins University in Medicine, as of 6 o'clock Eastern Time today, the number of cases of COVID-19 reported worldwide now stands at more than 25,400,000. The top three countries with reported positive cases: the United States, more than 6 million; Brazil, more than 3.9 million; India, more than 3.6 million. And sadly, this virus has claimed more than 849,000 lives worldwide. The top three countries with reported deaths: U.S., more than 183,000; Brazil, more than 121,000; Mexico, more than 64,000. Our coverage begins now. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, people are uneasy about President Donald Trump's scheduled visit to the city tomorrow. Now, you recall the city has been rocked by violent protests since police shot Jacob Blake more than a week ago. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany says Trump has a couple of goals in mind with this trip.
The president wants to visit hurting Americans. He shows up just like he showed up this weekend in Louisiana and Texas in response to Hurricane Laura. So he wants to show up in the city that's hurting. And also, I think it's just important to note that our federal response, look, in Kenosha and Minneapolis, there was violence on the streets. And literally within 24 hours, you saw a turnaround when federal officials came in. So I think highlighting that the federal government has done a lot in the way of using law and order to create peace, but showing up for hurting Americans is the primary concern.
Many local officials don't want the president to show up at all. Wisconsin's Governor Tony Evers sent Trump a letter asking him to reconsider the visit. Evers says an appearance by the president, and these are his words, will only hinder our healing. Meanwhile, White House hopeful Joe Biden is accusing the president of fomenting politically explosive violence.
Donald Trump has been a toxic presence in our nation for 4 years, poisoning how we talk to one another, poisoning how we treat one another, poisoning the values this nation has always held dear, poisoning our very democracy.
With just over 2 months until Election Day, the campaign has increasingly focused on the federal government's handling of the pandemic, racial violence, and the government's response to natural disasters such as California's wildfires and hurricanes. North America is preparing for the flu season as it simultaneously deals with COVID-19, and people are being told to get a flu shot. The state of Massachusetts has taken things a step further. It has a new rule now. This one requires students to get a flu shot before they can attend school. In Boston, this was the scene as hundreds took to the streets protesting the rule. Massachusetts became the first in the United States to add seasonal flu shots to a list of mandatory vaccines for students. Exemptions, though, will be granted for religious or health reasons. Demonstrators opposed to the new rule gathered peacefully yesterday at the State House. They denounced what they called an assault on their individual rights. The protesters included many parents with their children, as well as representatives of paramedical professions. One such person, Carla Leclerc, is a chiropractor. Leclerc says the government has no business mandating immunizations.
I'm strongly against opposed vaccination and mandated anything. And it should be a parent's choice whether to vaccinate their kids, especially for the flu shot, which is not proven safe, necessary, or effective. And this affects everybody, not just people in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts will set the precedent for other states. So if we can repeal this mandate, this will help for other states as well.
Health experts have said the vaccinations could avoid worsening the health crisis triggered by the pandemic, but they've stopped short of saying such shots should be mandatory. While the way doctors are trained in Canada is changing as a result of the pandemic, here are some observations in a recent article in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. Because of the outbreak of COVID-19, doctors doing postgraduate studies in many specialties, they're what's known as the residents in hospitals. Well, the residents have found themselves redeployed to other fields to help fight the virus. Elective procedures were canceled in many specialties, and this, of course, reduced the opportunities for clinical learning. Well, this training will have to be made up somehow. And to minimize infection risks in the future, surgical skills may have to be partially taught using virtual and augmented reality technologies. And you know, the days of a flock of interns and residents making the rounds in a hospital, all crammed into a patient room, well, that may be coming to an end as institutions try to limit the number of people in a room. As well, there's the need for physical distancing and, of course, the cost of PPE for everyone. Big medical conferences will likely be going virtual in the future. As well, interviews for residency positions and fellowships will be done by video conferencing. In the past, applicants would travel across the country, well, actually across the continent, to be interviewed for various positions. And then there's the issue of how do we pay for this? Postgraduate medical education is heavily based on a fee-for-service model, but there's less money coming in when procedures are canceled. And of course, the use of technology may increase training costs. You know, it's amazing what changes are sparked by an invisible virus. Still to come, updates from our Eagle News correspondents in Fort Washington, Maryland, Union Township, New Jersey, and Corpus Christi, Texas. This is Eagle News America.
The New Era University, in its 45th year of excellence, discipline, and service to humanity, will offer online education all levels beginning this first semester academic year 2020 to 2021 through the NEU Virtual Learning Environment, or NEU VLE. New Era University offers a complete basic education cycle from kindergarten up to senior high school, offering all strands. NEU has 18 colleges, and 2 graduate schools. It also offers ALS and ETF. Best of all, NEU has the most affordable tuition fees among private universities in the Philippines. NEU is at Quezon City, the city of San Fernando, Pampanga, General Santos City, South Cotabato, Lipa City, Batangas, and Pinugay, Baras, Rizal.
New Era University is under the stewardship of Dr. Dilo L. Rosas.
What are you waiting for? Be part of the new normal. Enroll now. Classes start on October 5, 2020.
You're watching Eagle News America. I'm Thomas I. Likeness. Well, some good news from Maryland. Eagle News correspondent Arlene Ocampo reports that the state's health metrics continue to decline and the economy is picking up.
Thank you, Thomas. Maryland's health metrics continue to decline. The state's 7-day positivity rate for COVID-19 is 3.26%. The daily positivity rate is at 2.80%. The positivity rate for the state has been under 5% since June 25. Hospitalizations are at 377 and the ICU beds are at 107. Marylanders are still being encouraged to undergo testing, especially if you've attended large gatherings or traveled recently. Meanwhile, 53,900 jobs were added in the month of July based on a report from the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, lowering Maryland's unemployment rate to 7.6%. Marylanders gained 156,200 jobs during the ongoing recovery. Governor Hogan reminded Marylanders that the economy is open, but also recovering at the same time. Hogan pointed out that only the people of Maryland can keep the state open for business by continuing to follow health guidance. The governor commends those businesses who take these precautions seriously, that they even display the Maryland Strong Back to Business pledge sign on the front of their stores and their businesses. In helping with the recovery of the economy, Marylanders are encouraged to continue to support local businesses. Governor Hogan proclaimed Saturdays in the month of September as Buy Maryland Seafood Days. This is to support the state's iconic seafood industry. The seafood industry is important to the state's economic recovery. The seafood distributors, watermen, suppliers, and processors have been operating continuously since the start of the pandemic. This industry supports more than 3,000 jobs across the state. Maryland's Best Seafood, a marketing program within the Maryland Department of Agriculture, has created an interactive application to help consumers locate those local producers. This can be found on their Twitter page. Let's support Buy Maryland Seafood Days every Saturday in the month of September. This will allow more money back in the pockets of the Maryland seafood industry and reinvest in our communities. Maryland Governor Hogan said that the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries provide some of the world's best and bountiful seafood, including blue crabs, rockfish, oysters, and blue catfish. Supporting Maryland's sustainable seafood industry and related businesses by purchasing their products throughout the year is important to Maryland's economic recovery. In Fort Washington, Maryland, Arlene Ocampo, Eagle News, we live in interesting times. Back to you, Thomas.
Arlene, I've got to ask, what are you going to be doing to support the Buy Maryland Seafood Days?
Well, Thomas, I've always enjoyed venturing out to the local businesses, whether it be retail related or food related. So for this time around, what I'm planning on doing is checking out that list and then venturing out to a place not close to my home. So another part of Maryland that I have not ventured out to, so I can at least one, venture out to a location of Maryland that I've never been to, and then secondly, enjoy the good food that they will have.
You don't know how fortunate you are there. I live in a landlocked province. I'm about a 10-hour drive or an hour and a half flight away from the ocean, so seafood here is pretty rare. Count your blessings.
Thank you.
Okay, we go to New Jersey now, where our Eagle News correspondent, Carlo Valdez, reports that restaurants and movie theaters in the state are set to reopen this Friday.
Phil Murphy signed an executive order allowing indoor dining at 6 a.m. on Friday, September the 4th. This will allow restaurants to resume at 25% capacity. Here's New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy with more details.
Today I am signing an executive order, and Judy will issue an executive directive later today, I believe, that will allow indoor dining to resume at 6 a.m. this upcoming Friday, September 4th. I'm proud that our restaurants will be able to return to some level of indoor service for the Labor Day weekend. And by the way, I looked ahead for the weather and it looks pretty good, so knock on wood, it'll stay that way. Of course, this resumption of indoor dining will come with strong limits on capacities as well as other requirements which will be strictly enforced. As we all know, this pandemic isn't over yet, and our goal is to ensure this step is done properly to prevent the kind of spikes we saw in other states that allowed their restaurants to reopen too fully and too quickly, steps which required us to hit the pause button on our earlier plan to allow indoor dining to resume. As with the reopening of gyms, there's a long list of required steps as well as additional recommendations being made, and I know Judy will speak more to these in a few moments, but allow me, if I can, to run through some of the top lines. To begin with, the capacities inside any restaurant will be capped at 25%. Additionally, groups will also be capped at 8 individuals, excepting for immediate families. All groups of diners will be required to be kept at a minimum of 6 feet apart. All staff will be required to wear masks at all times. All diners will also be required to wear masks at all times when they're not in their seats. Any customer who either does not wear or refuses to wear face masks absent a legitimate medical reason cannot be seated indoors. Additionally, we are asking that diners keep their masks on while waiting for their food and once they're finished eating or drinking. And food and beverages can only be consumed while seated. Walking around with a drink indoors will not be tolerated. If you're dining at a restaurant that provides table service, you'll only be able to order your food while seated at your table, and the staff are the only ones who can bring you your food or beverage. In other words, if you're seated at a table, you can't go to the bar to get another drink or place an order for another dish. You must allow your server to place and deliver those orders for you. That's not.
Additionally, movie theaters and other indoor performance venues are also allowed to reopen the same day on September the 4th. The capacity is capped at the lesser of 25% or 150 people. Social distancing and masks are to be enforced at all times. And as for coronavirus stats and numbers, New Jersey reports of 352 new positive COVID-19 test results, pushing the total to 191,960. Sadly, New Jersey is reporting another 8 COVID-19 deaths, pushing the total to 14,165 lives lost. In Union Township, New Jersey, Carlo Valdez, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you.
Down south now to the great state of Texas, where we say howdy. We're joined live today by Eagle News correspondent Jane Kathleen Gregorio. She tells us about President Donald Trump's visit to the States. And again, howdy.
Thank you, Thomas, and howdy from the Lone Star State. Just 2 days after Hurricane Laura crashed into Louisiana Thursday morning, President Donald Trump got a first-hand look at the aftermath in both Louisiana and the southeast parts of Texas, Orange County in particular. At least 4 people in Texas have died as a result of the hurricane, 3 of the deaths being blamed on carbon monoxide poisoning from generators, according to officials. The president was met by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Senator Ted Cruz, and local officials, along with leaders from FEMA and the Texas Department of Emergency Management. Although the damage in Texas was less compared to Louisiana's Lake Charles area, Orange County experienced significant damage from Laura's path in Texas, with parts of the region suffering loss of power and water for the next several weeks. Just before the hurricane's landfall, President Trump had approved emergency disaster declarations for Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas to cover emergency protective response actions taken by state, local, and tribal officials. During the briefing in Orange, Texas, President Trump commented on the power of Laura within 36 hours going from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane, with winds reaching 175 to 185 miles an hour. He mentioned how it was one of the strongest storms that hit Louisiana and Texas within the last 150 years. President Trump stated that FEMA had delivered 400,000 liters of water and 250,000 meals already, and is working with the private sector to restore power to remaining residents. In his update of recovery efforts, Governor Abbott stated, "Right now, our areas of focus are on power, water, points of distribution, safe return of evacuees, and damage assessment." On power and water restoration, peak power outages exceeded 350,000 locations across 35 counties. By Saturday morning, emergency crews had already repaired more than 230,000 of those power outage incidents. With 111 drinking water system assessments completed, 84 are operational, with 26 systems still under the boil water notice. Governor Abbott thanked the president for his quick response in following up on their emergency request, stating, "I have declared a disaster in 62 counties, and the president has similarly declared a disaster in each of those counties. So on behalf of all of those 62 counties, we all say thank you, Mr. President, for that." Governor Abbott also announced that the Texas Health and Human Services Commission will be providing approximately $188 million in emergency food benefits for the month of September as Texas continues to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Texas HHS Access and Eligibility Services Deputy Executive Commissioner Wayne Salter stated, "As families return to school, this extension helps Texans purchase healthy, nutritious foods for their households." Texans in need can apply for benefits at yourtexasbenefits.com or use the Your Texas Benefits mobile app to manage their benefits. In Corpus Christi, Texas, I'm Jane Kathleen Gregorio, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Thomas.
Jane Kathleen, I'm curious, how many people ended up using those evacuation shelters?
Well, Thomas, that's a good question. There were actually over 10,000 evacuees that were in shelters throughout the state of Texas, and approximately 3,300 of those were hotel rooms. Of the shelter residents, the Texas Division of Emergency Management leader Nim Kidd is tracking more than 2,200 shelter residents who came from Louisiana. But more important is that 10,000 of those evacuees were sheltered in what's called non-congregate settings. And what that means is that they were in hotel rooms, typically. That's so important because it was a response to Hurricane Laura, which was also responding to COVID-19. And according to Nim Kidd, it was the best setting for someone who's an evacuee from a hurricane. That's not a large congregate setting, but rather separate settings to prevent the spread of the virus. Comment?
Now you're in the Corpus Christi area. What was it like there? Was there much damage there? Power outages, flooding, that sort of thing?
You know, surprisingly, Thomas, although this area would have, probably been in, normally in this time of year, especially with Hurricane Harvey 3 years ago, which devastated our area. This time around, we were further west from the actual landfall of the hurricane. So here in this part of the Gulf Coast, we actually experienced some overcast weather, a lot of heat and humidity, a little bit of rain and some winds, but nothing as disastrous as what Louisiana and East Texas encountered. Thomas?
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you for your report, Jane Kathleen. We've got more to come. We'll have updates from our correspondents in Las Vegas, Nevada, Oxnard, California, and Washington, D.C. This is Eagle News. This is Eagle News America. I'm Thomas I. Lightness. Las Vegas remains a hotspot for COVID-19. That story from Eagle News correspondent Lori Jarvina.
Thank you, Thomas. Las Vegas is stating an elevated risk of transmission level for COVID-19. It's been about a month now since Governor Steve Sisolak and the COVID-19 Mitigation and Management Task Force unveiled the long-term mitigation strategy for the state of Nevada in regards to COVID-19. They continue to monitor the data weekly, and as of last week, 6 out of the 7 counties are still meeting at least 2 of the 3 criteria showing a sustained elevated risk of transmission for COVID-19. The 3 criteria are the following. 1, average number of tests per day per 100,000 residents should not be less than 150 over a 14-day period. 2, case rate per 100,000 should be more than 200 over a 30-day period. And 3, case rate of more than 50 and testing positivity of more than 7% over a 14-day period. In addition to their current action plan, Clark County will partner with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the state of Nevada to administer up to 60,000 additional free drive-through coronavirus tests starting today through September 18th. Testing continues to be critical, and everyone, including those who don't show any symptoms or asymptomatic, are encouraged to be tested. It's the best way to know how the virus is spreading and how it is affecting the community. In addition, identifying asymptomatic cases will help adjust the prevention and control measures needed to continue to mitigate the spread of the virus. For more information on testing sites, visit nvhealthresponse.nv.gov. All counties, regardless of risk of transmission level, are strongly encouraged to continue to follow the guidelines regarding the wearing of face coverings, limiting the size of gatherings, and limiting capacity in businesses. Other quick updates on what's going on in Las Vegas. The Mirage Resort reopened their doors since they closed in March on August 27th. McCarran International Airport surpassed 1.6 million passengers in July, which is a 37% increase compared to June, when they reported reaching a little over 1 million passengers. As for our current COVID-19 statistics, the total number of cases as of today is 69,228 and 1,305 deaths.
Standing by.
In Las Vegas, I'm Lori Jarvina, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Thomas.
Do you know who I am? Yeah, that's what famous people always say when they're confronted by somebody in authority. And I've got to wonder whether that's what these 2 guys asked police when they knocked on the door. Eagle News correspondent David Reggio tells us about TikTok stars Bryce Hall and David Blake. They've been charged with hosting large parties in their Hollywood home. David, tell us the story.
Thank you, Thomas. Los Angeles files criminal charges against TikTok stars Bryce Hall and Blake Gray for hosting large party gatherings in their shared Hollywood Hills home, violating the Safer LA Health Order and the city's Party Health Ordinance. Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Fuhrer made this announcement last Friday during his press conference. Let's take a look.
So among those charged for violating 2 things, for violating the Safer LA Health Order and the city's Party House Ordinance, are TikTok stars Bryce Hall and Blake Gray, who share a home in the Hollywood Hills on Appian Way. We allege these hosts have been incredibly irresponsible, with a highly infectious disease spreading and parties banned because of it, and we allege they violated the law. These parties can be really out-of-control nightclubs. There can be hundreds of people, loud music long into the night, and cars that block the street for emergency vehicles. We allege that in many cases, these parties and the party houses associated with them have hijacked the quality of life for neighbors in the affected communities. And I want to make a very clear point about our allegations against these 2 party house hosts, Mr. Hall and Mr. Gray. If you have a combined 19 million followers on TikTok in the middle of a public health crisis, you should be modeling great behavior best practices for all of us, rather than brazenly violating the law and then posting videos about it, as we allege happened here. So among those charged,
Attorney Fuhr further detailed that the city became aware of the party situation at their home last August 8, when police officers arrived at the scene in response to a complaint call. During this time, the officers gave a warning to Bryce Hall that large gatherings were not allowed under the current Safer LA Health Order and issued him a party house citation. In addition, officers posted the notice of violation regarding large parties at the home with the initial warning of non-compliance with the Safer LA Health Order. The police officers then waited until all guests had departed from the scene. Several days later, on August 14th, police officers were again dispatched to the house in response to another call reporting that shots were fired. Upon arrival, the Los Angeles Police Department officers found hundreds of people on site in celebration of Bryce Hall's 21st birthday. As there were no indication found that a gun had been fired, police officers spoke to Blake Gray, who confirmed that he was knowledgeable of the first citation that he given to Bryce Hall, and it also issued Gray a separate citation. An updated notice of violation regarding large parties with the initial warning of non-compliance with the Safer LA Health Order was again posted at the home. Days later, on August 19th, the city shut off utility service at this Hollywood Hills house. In addition, 2 other homeowners were also charged at Los Angeles, tries to put an end to these party houses, which are potential places for people to spread and transmit the coronavirus. In Oxnard, California, David Reggio, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you, Thomas.
David, you've been following this story since the beginning. On August 19th, you reported about the mayor shutting off the water and power to this home. Now, if they're found guilty, what are Hall and Gray facing, as well as those 2 other homeowners who were charged?
Yes, Thomas. That was me who reported on that story. During that time, the names of the party hosts or homeowners were not publicly announced. These are serious allegations, as earlier this month, the Los Angeles County Public Health Department had already issued their public statement about these mega parties in people's homes, stating that the highest risk settings are large in-person gatherings, where it is difficult for individuals to remain spaced at least 6 feet apart and where face coverings are not worn. The consequences of these large parties ripple throughout our entire community because the virus can quickly and easily spread. So those found guilty of those allegations and misdemeanors are facing up to 1 year in jail and up to $2,000 in fines. Thomas?
That's pretty serious. Now, everybody's going to ask you this. Were you invited?
Definitely not, especially when everything is in chaos. So you always want to be safe and stay at homes as you should be.
Good advice for everyone. Stay home. Okay, we go to the arts and culture file now. Eagle News correspondent Eliza Gonzalez-Manglegmont has 2 items for us today. First, she's going to tell us about an upcoming Korea Media Arts virtual exhibit. And then a story about a virtual summer school that is wrapped up. It was organized by Philippine-American educators, and it translates from Filipino into English as classroom at the embassy. Eliza, give us the details.
Thanks, Tom. The Korean Cultural Center Washington, D.C., or the KCCDC, presents the first virtual exhibition of the center's 2020 Korean Media Arts series, K-Art at Home, Yalu. The virtual exhibit, Tom, features digital creations of Korean multimedia artist Yalu, or Ji Yeon Lim. Yalu will feature 4 of her single-channel video works, Sibum Coach, New Year Parade, New Millennium Workout Routine, and Korea Workout Routine. KCCDC says Yalu explores contemporary consumer culture and symbolism in the context of her Asian cultural heritage, rooted in her experiences while living abroad. Yalu mixes various technology-based forms such as single-channel video, media facades, projection mapping, digital textiles, and virtual reality applications. The self-titled exhibition aims to provide comfort to those affected and exhausted by the effects of the pandemic. The 2020 Korean Media Arts Series will offer cutting-edge art to the public during a time of limited in-person events, highlighting a diversity of works by Korean multimedia artists throughout 2020. K-Art at Home Yalu will release online September 4 at 6 p.m. and be viewable on the KCCDC website at washington.dc.korean-culture.org through September 24. Meanwhile, the United Federation of Filipino-American Educators Maryland Chapter, or Unified MD, and the Philippine Embassy through Centro Rizal, Washington, D.C., conducted this year's Silid Aralan sa Embahada, or Classroom at the Embassy. The program used Zoom and Google Classroom platforms for 4 days this August. This year's theme was Tuluyang Pagpapalawig ng Kulturang Pilipino sa Gitna ng Pandemya, or TOM translates to Continuous Enhancement of Filipino Culture amid the pandemic. Silid Aralan sa Embahada 2020 held daily 1-hour classes for young Filipinos and Filipino Americans. Topics included Philippine geography, history, national symbols, arts and craft, Philippine folk songs, music and poems, national costumes and folk dances, national language, storytelling, and plays, and Filipino values. A culminating program was held August 15. Tom, close to 80 learners who completed the required number of modules were recognized. Silid Aralan sa Embahada is a yearly collaborative learning program between the embassy and the volunteer Filipino-American teachers providing summer classes focusing on various facets of Philippine culture and heritage. The classes are held in August, and August is also celebrated as the Philippine National Language Month, or Buwan ng Wikang Pambansa. Founded in 2013, Unified is composed of Filipino teachers in the United States with a mission to foster unity and camaraderie among Filipino educators and help uplift communities in the U.S. and the Philippines. Back to you, Tom.
What a great way to promote culture, in especially in generations that have grown up entirely in America, the second and third generation. Because I know here in Edmonton that's one of the concerns of the Philippine community and other ethnic groups is second and third generation. You've lost the language, you've lost the culture. There's no connection anymore.
That's true. That's true.
But let's get back to the art exhibit. What role do virtual events like these play? This pandemic has just thrown a wrench into everything, you know. Especially in a city like yours, the culture and arts community, very, very vibrant there. A lot of big embassy events. Those are a thing of the past, at least for the time being. So how do these virtual events help out in that?
You're right about that, Tom. What we said earlier, people are just exhausted by the effects of this pandemic, and cultural events sponsored by the embassies here or other organizations like the Korean Cultural Center DC are events that people really look forward to attending. Tom, I remember last year one of the collaborative events that a number of embassies here put together was the Euro-Asia Shorts. It is a film festival where they presented short films from more than a dozen countries. It was quite a hit for film enthusiasts in the district. For me, these efforts through the arts really help bridge the cultural divide. But with what we're facing right now, with the current present circumstances, in-person events are very, very limited. So these virtual programs, Tom, although not equally comparable to the in-person experience, somehow help satisfy the craving, our craving for social and cultural interaction, don't you think?
It still gives you that link to culture and arts, but I know it's the in-person stuff. We sadly miss it up here, and I'm sure it's that way worldwide. Thank you for your report, Eliza. Coming up, we've got a conversation about weathering life's storms. You're watching Eagle News America.
Know the latest news and information here and abroad in Aguila Balita, the morning and noontime news programs brought about by the synergy of Net25 and Radio Aguila.
Get the fresh news and reports from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao in our midday newscast in Aguila, Pilipinas.
Track the latest stories in the provinces in Aguila, Provincia.
Be aware of important events in the region in ASEAN in Focus.
And be updated with the biggest news around the world with the support of its international correspondents and volunteers in Eagle News International.
Tune in to Mata ng Aguila and get the day's headlines and news that are sharp, accurate, and objective. Catch all of these on Net25, your reliable source of news, entertainment, and technology updates.
You can also watch our news and current affairs programs and entertainment shows through our Eagle News and Net25 Facebook pages, YouTube channel, at Eagle News, and in our live streaming sites. Be informed with relevant news and information in these interesting times.
Hi, I'm Mia Pangyarihan at samahan niyo kami dito sa Tagisan ng Galing Part 2. Who will win the bout and who will get out? Abangan niyo yan dito lang sa Part 2 ng Tagisan ng Galing dito sa Net25.
This is Eagle News America. I'm Thomas I. Likeness. According to the National Hurricane Center, the Atlantic hurricane season runs from the 1st of June until the end of November. Now, the peak of this season is in mid-August right now until late October. During this time of year, hurricane-prone states prepare for damage that this natural calamity brings, because more often than not, these storms leave damage. One thing is noticeable, though, and not only with hurricanes, but think about the wildfires and so on. I think about the wildfires we had up here where they evacuated an entire city. One thing noticeable about these calamities is that during them and after them, people's will to survive, their resilience, that's when they're often manifest. Tonight, we're going to ask our Eagle News team what kind of storms they have weathered, whether these be literal storms or some other kind of storms. Let's begin our discussion with you, Arlene. Tell us about storms you have weathered.
Thank you, Thomas. Actually, just living here in Maryland, I don't recall any, the hurricanes or tornadoes. But I do remember one winter where we had an actual blizzard, where there was probably maybe more than a foot of snow because the government was shut down for a whole week. We lost power, and I believe there was even ice involved as well. But what I do recall with that is at one point I was craving for some junk food. So I had to make my way to a store. So I picked up my shovel with some of the family members, and we actually had to shovel our way through, just to have a pathway to get to where we were trying to get. And with that, so it ended up being it's supposed to be like a 15 to 20 minute walk. What ended up being about an hour walk, and that was just one way. So that's what I can recall, a blizzard, but that was years ago, and honestly, we don't even get that much snow here as well. We pretty much just get the 4 seasons, but hardly any storms. I'm sure the others have encountered, more storms than what we have here on this part of the country.
Jane Kathleen had referenced storms that they have in Texas. She was lucky this time, but Jane Kathleen, I understand you've been through a few hurricanes yourself.
Yes, Thomas. Actually, that's part of the life here if you choose to live in the Texas coast. Every 2 or 3 years, you're going to get a hurricane, or in the northern parts of Texas, maybe tornadoes or flash flooding if you're in the Houston area. So one of the things, and it's funny that Arlene should mention having a junk food craving. I actually made a list of things that I keep in stock whenever, for example, when Hurricane Harvey came around. This is what we did to kind of prepare for, like any loss of water or loss of power, which actually both happened during that time. So for physical storms or hurricanes, we would make sure that, we have a flashlight ready with extra batteries. We have to make sure all of our phones are charged in advance of the power going out. Also making sure we have candles with lighters or matches. A variety of canned food and dry goods, especially junk food. Prepare that in advance in case you're going to come across a craving, but there's no store that you can run to because everybody else has no power. A bathtub filled with clean water. We also pre-fill some buckets or some large containers with water, for washing dishes or, taking a bath, because water will be minimal during that time. Also lots of drinking water, like bottled water on hand. Hand sanitizers, paper towels, toilet paper if there's not a large shortage during that time, and disinfectant wipes. So just some of the things that we have prepared on hand in advance if ever a hurricane comes up in our area. Thomas?
Some of the problems with hurricanes, you've got flooding, you've got power outages, that sort of thing, as well as building damage. From your experience, what were the biggest challenges, I guess, you've faced?
Having, Hurricane Harvey being one of the biggest challenges that we had. Fortunately, in our neighborhood, we were not too affected because we were on higher ground, but at our church, there was a little bit of flooding. So one of the challenges was trying to drain the water from the basement level of our church during that time, and everybody was just coming together to try to help out. Also, when the power went out for 3 days, it was difficult because it's like everyone's used to having their devices, and of course I had to report during that time, so I had to get creative and use my car charger, my car battery charger for charging up my devices. So some of the things that I recall from that time.
We're going to move to the West Coast now, talk to David Reggio, and you don't get the same kind of storms. I think the biggest calamity you face out there is the wildfires.
Exactly. No, Tom, we don't really, in this area, we don't really go through a lot of storms or hurricanes, but the wildfires we do. We actually, a few years ago, there was wildfires called the Thomas fires, which were really close to our area, especially with what Jane Kathleen has mentioned. It could be really informative and useful to remember what to bring and how to be prepared. And luckily, I had many contacts and people that I could rely on that was able to remind me to be prepared for that sort of thing. We even had to just prepare for an evacuation just in case it did reach our area, but fortunately it was not able to, and we were able to stay in our homes. But that entire night we just went through a huge blackout. We didn't have any any light or any electricity, so we had to put on candles around the house and just make use of whatever we had around. And the day after, they even had to cancel school days because of the air and the smoke around the area. No one was able to breathe or to walk around simply because the atmosphere was just too toxic to be around. So I could really say that those kinds of disasters were, fortunately, we were able to overcome that, but it was definitely a moment to remember and to always prepare and to make sure that everything is on hand and to make sure that everything is in order. Thomas?
Do you still have that state of mind where you've got to have that readiness? Is it still top of mind with you?
Yes. It is a really scary feeling especially when you're always taught in school or with people to always bring your flashlight, to have your food ready just in case of a food shortage. And when it actually does happen, it could really scare you at the moment. But luckily I was prepared and had the right mindset when it comes to having all of these things ready and supporting my family in times when they really needed it. Thomas?
The other calamity, David, that could happen out there, of course, is earthquakes. Is there? I guess for you folks living out there, it's not. You're kind of used to it.
We are used to we are used to it, especially in school when we were taught to go under our desks or our tables whenever there's something falling down. But in the past, recently we have been experiencing quite a few earthquakes in our area, and that also was a scary feeling, especially when in the middle of the night you just suddenly feel that something's rumbling and you're confused for a second. But no, the next day when you actually see in the news that an earthquake does happen, it really motivates you to be really prepared when it actually does happen, and when it's in the future even more destructive. That's all the more you should be more prepared and safe when it comes to with your family members as well.
How do you or others psychologically cope with that kind of a threat?
Well, obviously when we remind each other, but we also help to motivate each other and our friends from school. We are ready for it as a family, but when it comes to other people that aren't prepared, we also remind them and to tell them that not to worry, to always have everything in order, and to basically comfort them, because some of them might even have anxiety or trauma when it comes to these first lifetime events, and it could really scare you every single time that it happens. But luckily, in these recent times, earthquakes, we haven't really felt anything like that, or any wildfires, and but it's really good to keep a good mental note on that.
So always be prepared. Eliza, you live in the nation's capital, and there some would say the biggest hazard is politics. But seriously, what can you tell us about calamities, storms that you have weathered?
My story is a two-in-one story. It didn't happen here in the nation's capital, but it happened 20 years ago. It was November in 1995. My father had just passed away 5 months prior when this devastating typhoon, we call it typhoon in the Philippines, it hit this part of the Philippines where we were living. I had also just graduated from college and was still looking for a job that time. So it was a crucial stage in my adult life. That night, Tom, the winds were so strong that it blew away part of our roof. I could see the sky from our living room. We had a jaimito tree, or a star apple tree, in our backyard that was uprooted and flew and fell right over the house. So the rest of our roof caved in, and this huge tree, older than I was in the middle of our living room, Tom. My then 65-year-old mother was in such a state of panic, convincing me, of course, to leave the house, which obviously was about to fall apart. That moment, the only thing going on in my mind was, where are we to go? This house is all we have, and whatever is in it, however few, was pretty much what we can call our own. So In my 20-year-old mind, I hesitated and I told my mother that maybe the worst is over. I mean, how much worse can it get, right, Tom, with a huge fallen tree in your house? And during that time, in that place, evacuation centers weren't really that equipped, if there were any to be found. So we decided to stay and wait. And then when morning came, I went straight to the only refuge I know, which was church. Fallen trees and electric posts were all over the streets. There was no public transportation available, so I had to walk in the rain. But after feeling so much better, I walked home, not really knowing what was left of our house. I saw our neighbors carrying our things out onto the street and bringing them to this apartment building across the way. The owner very kindly offered one unit of her apartment to us. And remember, Tom, I just graduated that time and I was jobless. But the owner, this very kind-hearted neighbor of ours, said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "Just pay when you're able and however much you can afford once you get a job." So my life lesson here is material things are definitely replaceable. But the value of looking after one another, especially during tough times like what we're going through right now, be it a pandemic, be it a storm, be it a fire, you can't put a price tag on that. Looking after each other. That's my story.
And that really is the key, is looking after each other. And like we said, you see that sense of community in these times of disaster, people pitching in. And we all come out of it, quite frankly, I think we all come out of it a little bit stronger. And as we start to come out of this pandemic, let's not forget about our healthcare workers, our first responders, our essential workers. Let's continue to thank them with a round of applause. We appreciate you. We thank you for your service to us. And that's our program for today. Eagle News America, thank you for joining us. I'm Thomas I. Likeness. We truly live in interesting times.
Sila